ago, there was like a TV show called Star Search, and they would look for new talent. Well, nowadays we have American Idol, and we have, like the X Factor, and all these different shows that where America's Got Talent, England's Got Talent, all this kind. There's talent everywhere. And you wonder what the wise men were thinking, what the people from the East were looking for. Were they looking for that charismatic leader? What were they looking for? I'm not even sure they knew exactly what they were looking for, but they knew something was going on. They could not ignore their knowledge of the stars and the position of stars and constellations, because this was a fascination that people had. People would guide themselves in their journeying by looking at the stars. It was something that was important, and yet they noticed things. And way back in about 4 or 5 BC, it's interesting, in China, they were tracking different things in the sky, and they noted that there were, as we would understand them, the planets that were lining up. Probably, they think it was Saturn and Jupiter that were lining up about the time that Jesus was born. And then there was also the recording of a supernova about the time of Jesus' birth, which is interesting. Of course, supernova is when a star kind of expands and kind of blows out and just sends all sorts of light. But think of the timing of that light, because there's the explosion of the expanding of that supernova, of that star, light many, many light years before that, and the timing of that coming right exactly at the birth of Jesus. I mean, God has foreknowledge, God has plans, and God has ways to communicate that God, in His time, makes possible in preparation. So to think about the timing of that supernova, if that was the Star of Bethlehem, and light years before, and it's mind-boggling. But God has the foreknowledge of all these things. So we're here as we look at Jesus in Genesis, taking a look, yes, at the wise men, as we will look at Matthew chapter 2, but also taking a look at a little part of Genesis chapter 1. And yes, we're going back a chapter or two from where we were last week, because I want to focus on the stars and their purpose. And we see the connection here to Jesus' birth. And I'm going to see. I want to ask you, how many of you have just had incredible experiences out under the stars? How many of you just have had incredible experiences out when you get camping or you're out there just at night, and you've had experiences where the stars just lead you to a sense of awe and wonder? You've had that before. I think this is a common, wonderful thing. And it's in Psalm 19 that we see this beautiful psalm. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, as we know them, but no sound is heard from them that we would hear audibly. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. So the creation itself declares the glory of God, and the stars in their immenseness tell us something about how big and powerful is the Lord our God. And it should lead us to a sense of worship and honor, like a deep sense of reverence and a deep respect of God. It makes me think about how sometimes people think they have God in their pocket, that they know all about God. And I find that when God speaks, it's something that I hear and I'm humbled by. It's something that we just have to recognize, that God is very powerful and very much sovereign over all things. And yet God speaks to us, even through his creation. So we see here in the fourth day of creation, the coming of the visibility of light. Let's just read this as a whole for this day, the fourth day of creation. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. Now, we have to understand that, of course, the sun and the moon were made before this day of creation, because you see that there were plants and there was life before this, if you look at the third day. But what was happening here? There was a change on the earth in terms of what was visible. The visibility of the sun and the moon became something that became a reality for if you were on the earth and you were looking. We realized that this was revealed to Moses. What we have in Genesis was given to Moses. And Moses was recording what God was giving him, but also you wonder, and I would think that Moses must have seen something to reinforce the word that God was giving him, a vision or something of that nature. And it's also recognized that Moses was acquainted with the creation narratives from the region. So it wasn't that he had no knowledge of these things, because it was part of the teaching, oral tradition of history. So there was a coming together of that oral tradition and history, a revelation given to Moses, and him recording it in a way that we can understand it, in words that we can understand. So we see here this matter of the separation of day and night. Once again, it's a matter of visibility. It's not that the sun and the moon all of a sudden are not created in this fourth day, but they become visible. There's a change in the atmosphere itself, a change that allows the visibility of this. So God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night." So we see the separation of day and night. Now think about how important that is, that we are given a sense of definition for every day. That there's a time to function where we're given light, and then there's a time for rest and recovery. It's all part of a pattern, all part of what God has intended, that there be order, that there be this ongoing way to live and to recharge, and all the ebb and flow of energy for life. And even the earth itself, if we had continuous light, we would have a problem with our atmosphere, with our environment. Things would dry out. We need that time of shadow so that there can be recovery and all the different things that are part of the atmosphere that we have and the environments that we have. So these are also, this pattern is given also for signs and for seasons and the marking of time. And so we see that all this is part of God's plan, and that God set forth a pattern. So this pattern also is part of God's governance. There's this way in which all this is part of God's own providential work. So God made these two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. So we recognize that all of this is part of God's own plan of oversight, of care, of keeping. Of course, we recognize in history people have made the mistake of worshiping the sun or worshiping the moon. And that, of course, is worshiping the creation and not the Creator. But we recognize that God, in His governance, has made these entities, which are celestial, energy and mass that all work for the purposes that he has. And all these are part of his governance. And we're blessed by them. You think about the blessing of the energy that God provides, all that God has given. And I like verse 16, the last part of it, and he also made the stars. Now to me that's just very simple when you think about how big the universe is. What more could be said by Moses in this moment? He once again reaffirms what was affirmed earlier in Genesis chapter 1 about God creating the heavens and the earth. The heavens are vast and broad, and when you look out upon them, indeed, it is something to behold. How many of you have seen the Northern Lights? The Northern Lights? Okay. Aurora Borealis, and is it caused by magnetics of the North Pole and dust in the atmosphere, or is it caused by the light of the sun bouncing off the polar ice caps? There's several theories on this, but nonetheless, they remind us of the splendor and beauty and power and majesty of God. So whether it be the stars and the work of the stars even bouncing off a planet polar cap, or through the light that comes through our sun, which is a star, or at night all the stars that we behold in the Milky Way, all of this reminds us that God has made all these things. God has made all these things. So it tells us something. And did you know that much of the matter that's important to us has been created through the stars? That we are basically composed of the dust of stars? Like, take calcium in your bone. Calcium cannot be created except through great energy, through the explosion of suns. I was reading an astronomer saying that he was looking at a fossil he had of bone, and that the energy that's created is what's needed to make even calcium and many other important things of life. So we realize that the stars themselves have an importance. So God looks at all this and says it's good. God looks at all this and says that it's good. Okay, let's get into the search of the wise men. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. Now you would expect that they would go to Jerusalem. And it was important that they go to whoever the magistrate was to basically check in and show respect. The request, indeed, is they are looking for the one who would be born King of the Jews. So there was some form of a prophecy or an awareness that they would have had, because many other nations were familiar with the prophecies and teachings of the Jews. The Jews themselves had been at times dispersed among the nations. So other nations had become aware of some of these prophecies, that at some point God would indeed come in the form of a Messiah. So even God even used the Jews' dispersion. He even used their exile to spread the teachings of this prophecy. Even those hard times we go through, God uses. And God had used these times of exile to lead the people of Israel to bring their message, their prophecy out to all these other nations. And now here they came. And they saw the star. And they came to worship the Christ. And just imagine Jerusalem at the time. I mean, they have been overrun by the Romans. There's this evil King Herod, and he is just, he's a conniving kind of guy. He's going to do whatever he can to keep his power. And so this news came really as a disturbance of their false peace. He had created a false peace. There's a lot of different ways that different leaders will create a false peace. But when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. He was disturbed because this would mean, indeed, a big challenge and to Herod's own authority. So what does he do? He calls a meeting. He gathers together all the chief priests and teachers of the law, and he asks them the question where the Messiah would be born. And of course, they did know the prophecy. They did know that it would be in Bethlehem in Judea. And indeed, this itself may seem like a surprise to Herod. And even if you know that this is a prophecy, it still seems outlandish. How would God choose Bethlehem, the least of these towns of Judah? Why would he choose such a place? And yet this is the prophecy. And the prophecy is that he not only would be a ruler, but he would be a shepherd. You think about Jesus. He said, I am the good shepherd. You think about Jesus and how he indeed humbled himself as a servant. And yet, he was crowned the King of Israel on a cross. It seems like a strange kind of working, and yet he rose victorious. So anyway, that's fast forwarding too far, but right now we look at King Herod and the secret meeting. He called the Magi in secretly. And he wanted to know all the details. And once he found out some of those details, he had a plan. He sent them to Bethlehem. He tells them to look for this child and to come back and let him know when they find him so he can, quote, worship him. Of course, Herod had ulterior motives. Herod later would do an awful thing in killing many innocent children after Jesus and his family had fled to Egypt. But nonetheless, we see here that the kings, the Magi, continue on to follow God's direction. As they went on their way toward Bethlehem, the star that they had seen before once again appeared. And this itself, they saw as a miracle, as a sign. And when you find that you're being guided, don't you find that it gives you a sense of purpose and joy? I want to just touch on this quickly. When you find that you're being guided, as the wise men felt that they were being guided, doesn't it give you a sense of urgency? Doesn't it give you a sense of peace? And this is the kind of thing that they were feeling within. They were overjoyed as they saw the star because they had great hopes and expectations. And all of humanity has great hope and expectation for something better than what we have now. For something better that God is preparing. Something better that God is planning. And when we have that hope, and when we realize that we're being guided by something that God is placing before us, that God gives us hope and a sense of purpose, that's when our life begins to take on that deeper sense of joy. That's when we realize that we are not alone, that God indeed has a plan. And in the midst of this, they came to the house, and there they saw Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. And they were in awe, because there was something about Jesus that answered their quest, that answered their need. And in the midst of his presence, they brought their gifts. They brought what I would call gifts of love, faith, and hope. Gold is often associated with a covenant. We give gold rings as a covenant of love. And indeed, the giving of gold is to give of something of great value. And the frankincense, it's something that it was often burnt as a way to sense the presence of God, or the presence of something beautiful. And in the presence of Jesus, they realized they were before something that was beautiful, something that told them of God's presence. And when we believe that God is present, we have faith. And in the midst of that faith, they also had hope, because myrrh also expressed this matter of healing. Myrrh was an oil that was often applied for healing on wounds or maybe to calm somebody. It reminded them of peace. So there's this matter of hope and healing. Each of these three gifts spoke of something that involved their belief that God was indeed doing something in their midst. In this matter of bowing down and worshiping Jesus and opening these gifts, really it leads us to a sense of trust and worship. We also need to bring all of who we are to God. Our love, our faith, and our hope. Now, of course, they were warned not to go back to King Herod. And God is always faithful to lead those who seek Him. But God would indeed protect His Son, for He had a mission. And so did the wise men have a mission to go and tell others about Jesus in the place and time that God will lead them to. The question I come to here is, what do we bring to God? What do we bring to Jesus? And what kind of steps are we going to take? That we, first of all, worship and acknowledge Jesus, and then also prepare our hearts for what He would call us to do next. What kind of vision, dream, direction will God give us this coming year? God is working. God was working then, and He's working now, and He will work in your life when you place your trust in Him. The light of the Star of Bethlehem shone to lead them to Jesus. And then in Jesus, they found the true light that gives light to every person. And in Jesus, we are given a light that shines when we receive Him, a light that shines within, a light that gives us hope even in the most difficult times. And He is a light unto our path. He is a lamp unto our feet. So let's take steps together, trusting Him. Let's pray.